I knew I was screwed the moment the new VP called my department legacy overhead and smirked like he'd just discovered fire. But that wasn't the real kick in the gut. That came 20 minutes later when I found my termination paperwork sitting on top of my lunch in the break room fridge. Ham sandwich still cold. My future colder. That's me, Gordon Wright, 46, divorced once, 2 grown kids who think their old man fixes paperwork for a living, senior compliance engineer at Apex Defense Solutions, or I guess former senior compliance engineer. I'd been at that company for 10 years, long enough to see 3 CEOs, 2 corporate rebrandings, and enough PowerPoint presentations to sink a destroyer. My job wasn't glamorous, but it kept American pilots in the air and soldiers alive. You know all that high-tech defense equipment that keeps our military ahead of everyone else? Yeah, none of that happens unless someone quietly, without screwing it up, keeps all the FAA certificates, DoD clearances, and ITAR export controls running like a Swiss watch. That was me. 22 years Navy teaching me that details matter when lives are on the line, then 10 years at Apex making sure we didn't accidentally sell missile guidance systems to hostile nations. Nobody noticed me until I left, and then they noticed everything. Picture this, middle of Q3, Apex flying high. We've got 3 major DoD contracts running, fresh batch of Pentagon money flowing in, and the CEO quoting our $75 million in active contracts like it's tattooed on his chest. And in the middle of all this organized chaos, me quietly renewing our ITAR export license before the September 15th deadline, just like I had every year since 2014. I didn't ask for a parade. I didn't even ask for a working printer that didn't jam every 3rd page. I just did my job. Then Brandon shows up. Brandon Cole, VP of Strategic Operations, which is corporate speak for fire people and make it sound like progress. Fresh from some tech startup, all designer suits and enthusiasm. Drank energy drinks like communion wine, called meetings sync sessions, and actually used the phrase disruptive innovation in casual conversation. The man once referred to federal compliance as bureaucratic theater in a company-wide email and added a circus tent emoji. First time he looked at me, he blinked like I was part of the furniture. "Remind me what you do again?" he asked on a Tuesday. I remember because the coffee machine was broken and I was running on fumes. Export control compliance, ITAR regulations, DoD security clearance maintenance, FA, A certifications for our avionics division, everything that touches national security requirements. He nodded like he'd just heard someone recite a grocery list. By Thursday, he'd decided my position was inefficient redundancy. No warning, no transition planning, just a meeting invite titled Organizational Alignment and a stone-faced HR rep clutching a manila folder with my name on it. I was out by noon. No ceremony, no handshake, not even eye contact. I packed my things, a coffee mug from my old ship, a stress ball shaped like a fighter jet, and a sticky note that said ITAR renewal due Monday. Guess that wasn't my problem anymore. But here's the thing. Before I left, I did one last task. Not sabotage, not revenge, just following procedure. I opened up the ITAR export control system and found my designation as the authorized compliance officer. Still my name, Gordon Wright, in the federal database. I clicked edit, deleted my name, typed in Brandon Cole. Didn't forge anything, didn't hide it, submitted the form, saved the confirmation, logged out. Compliance is about accuracy, right? And technically he was the new head of operations, so technically he should be the designated officer. No malice, no drama. I just updated the paperwork and walked out. Brandon Cole made his grand entrance like a TED Talk presenter who'd binged too many leadership podcasts. First day on the job. He showed up in a Tesla with vanity plates reading Disrupt, wearing shoes so shiny I could see my 10 years of underpaid loyalty reflected in them. He breezed through security like he owned the air itself, fist-bumped the guard. Not out of respect, just to show he was one of the team. By 900, he'd already changed our Monday briefing from weekly status to innovation sprint, complete with emoji in the calendar invite. By 1000, he was holding court in the all-hands like he was launching a social media app instead of managing defense contracts with federal oversight breathing down our necks. "Let's eliminate legacy thinking," he said, sipping some overpriced energy drink. "We need to be lean, agile, and compliance forward. But let's be honest, regulation is just necessary friction. Like TSA. Nobody likes it, but you deal with it efficiently and move on." Nervous laughter from the younger crowd. The ex-military guys just looked at each other, already knowing who was getting cut first. He didn't mention me by name during that meeting, didn't acknowledge compliance directly. But the way his eyes skipped past mine like I was part of the exit signs told me everything. At 11:47 hours, my Outlook pinged. Meeting request, quick chat with Brandon. 15 minutes, no agenda, no context. Just the corporate smell of incoming layoffs masked by the HR department's vanilla air freshener. I walked into his new office. Glass walls, standing desk, some ridiculous treadmill workstation hybrid already humming under his Italian loafers. He gestured to a chair like a game show host about to spin the wheel of misfortune. Gordon, 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 he said, like we were old drinking buddies instead of two people who'd exchanged 0 words before this week. First off, thank you, seriously. I looked at your file. 10 years, Navy background. That's dedication. I nodded, stayed quiet. That said, he leaned back, hands behind his head like he was about to offer me a vacation package. We're restructuring. Compliance is being absorbed into legal. We're streamlining operations. Nothing personal, just overhead reduction. I looked at him. Just looked, understood. What I didn't say. Your ignorance is about to contaminate every federal contract this company pretends to understand. He smiled like that settled it, like he'd just told me the cafeteria was out of ranch dressing. Great. HR has your package ready. Someone will handle the transition documentation. I stood up. And my replacement? Legal will cover the basics. We're moving to a more integrated approach. That's when I knew. This wasn't just firing the compliance guy. This was dismantling federal oversight because some MBA thought regulations were optional accessories. I walked out without another word, past the ping pong table someone thought would boost morale, straight to HR. They were ready, of course. Folder prepared, NDA highlighted, severance check sealed. Any questions? The rep asked in the same tone. Someone might use asking if I wanted fries with that. I didn't have any. I signed the paperwork, turned in my badge, and walked past the server room marked Authorized Personnel Only. As I passed, I smiled, just barely. Not because I was happy to leave, but because I already knew the next 30 days would burn like jet fuel for anyone stupid enough to call federal compliance overhead. And Brandon had just become the designated compliance officer for $75 million worth of defense contracts without knowing what that meant. The first ping came Monday morning at 08:12. DoD procurement portal flagged a name mismatch in the export control chain. Nothing catastrophic yet, just a digital hiccup. Automated email fired off to legal, missing authorization documents for new compliance officer. Cole, Brandon, standard procedure if you knew what you were looking at. But nobody did, because the one person who did was at home in his garage organizing tools and drinking coffee from his old ship's mess. Hall. I didn't check email. Didn't peek at Slack. Deleted that app like pulling shrapnel out of my arm. Meanwhile, the cracks were spreading through the foundation. By 10:42, the Pentagon's export licensing system kicked back a red flag on our classified guidance systems contract. $23 million worth of technology so sensitive you needed 3 different clearances just to look at the blueprints. Alert: export authorization pending officer verification. Translation: we can't let you keep working on classified systems until you tell us who this new guy is and why he hasn't submitted required documentation. That afternoon, our main DoD contracting partner sent a soft hold notice. They flagged regulatory inconsistency in compliance chain and paused component delivery on 2 active projects. The email was polite. The subtext wasn't, "We're not risking our security clearances for a company whose paperwork smells like amateur hour." Inside Apex, legal started asking questions. Wasn't Gordon the point man on federal certifications? I thought he trained someone before leaving. Who's Brandon Cole? Nobody said it loud yet, but the smart ones started connecting dots. Tuesday morning brought a second Pentagon notice, this one copying our CEO. Contract performance suspended pending clarification of authorized compliance representation. Brandon, still high on his own efficiency, waved it off in a 10-minute alignment meeting. "It's handled," he said, bouncing a stress ball against his office window. "Just back-end administrative lag, legal's syncing with the federal portal. Nothing to worry about." Nobody looked convinced, especially not legal, who by then realized no verification paperwork had been submitted by Brandon or anyone else. That's when the whispers started. Not accusations, just pointed questions. Did anyone see Gordon train a replacement? Wasn't he the registered compliance officer? Why would he transfer authority to Brandon without documentation? But Brandon kept smiling, the kind of smile that becomes armor against panic. He scheduled a town hall to reinforce transparency, using words like operational synergy and compliance optimization. Nobody asked why the federal systems weren't aligned. Nobody except legal. Back home, I was halfway through a beer and deep into rewiring my garage workbench. I hadn't answered a single text from former coworkers, not the fake sympathy ones, not the few who actually seemed to care. One message did come through that I read twice, from Pentagon Procurement. "Mr. Wright, hope you're well. Quick question. Did you complete compliance officer transition for contract Delta 7749 before departing? Signature authorization shows discrepancy. Unsure who to contact for resolution." I stared at it, took another sip, thought about responding. Didn't. Instead, I blocked the number and put my phone face down. Let them figure it out. Let the system speak for itself. Because every clearance I ever maintained had a paper, trail, a verification chain, and trained hands guiding it. Right now, those hands were fixing a perfectly good workbench, and Brandon had no clue about the avalanche he'd just whistled into motion. Wednesday brought the first real panic. 3 more federal agencies sent alerts. FAA certification for our avionics division flagged as pending verification. ITAR export license showed incomplete documentation. DoD security clearance review initiated due to compliance chain irregularities. Brandon called an emergency meeting. Temporary administrative challenges, he announced to a room full of increasingly worried faces. Legal is handling federal coordination. We're streamlining the process. Someone from engineering raised a hand. What about the classified projects? Pentagon says we can't access materials until clearance is verified. Brandon's confidence flickered for just a second. That's being resolved. Legal has it covered. But legal didn't have it covered. Legal was discovering that federal compliance isn't something you absorb into a department like office supplies. It's a specialized skill set with certifications, relationships, and knowledge that takes years to build. And all of that knowledge had just walked out the door, taking 10 years of federal trust with it. By Thursday, the dominoes were falling faster. $75 million in active contracts, and 60% of them were now under some form of federal review or suspension. Brandon's streamlined approach had streamlined Apex right into a regulatory nightmare. And I was still in my garage, organizing tools and waiting for the inevitable phone call. Thursday night, 21:17 hours. Apex executive video conference looked like a court-martial, lit by laptop screens and dread. CEO Richard Mason was sweating so hard his camera looked fogged. He kept adjusting his tie like it was tightening with every question from the board. "What do you mean, regulatory suspension? How long has our ITAR status been unverified? Why weren't we notified about contract holds until the Pentagon sent alerts?" But the question that finally sent Mason into full damage control came from Jeremy Walsh, our biggest private investor. "We can't maintain a $75 million contract valuation if your intellectual property is frozen across multiple federal agencies. That's not an asset portfolio. That's a liability in fatigues." Silence. Then Mason started babbling about temporary administrative misalignment and compliance officer transition protocols, which sounds impressive until you realize it's corporate speak. For we let a startup VP mess with federal filings like he was playing solitaire. Stephen Parker, our general counsel and the only guy in the room with more anxiety than ego, was already 3 steps ahead. While Mason tap danced, Stephen shared his screen showing every federal filing for our classified contracts. One by one, he clicked through the digital forms. DoD, FAA, ITAR, Pentagon Procurement. Each one showed the same change within a 24-hour window. Each one listed the same name, Brandon Cole. Each one showed verification status, outstanding. Stephen didn't say anything for a long moment, just sat there blinking. Then, "This doesn't make sense. Gordon always filed verification the same day he submitted updates." More silence. He pulled up the ITAR export control form, the one I'd updated my last day. There it was, clear as daylight. Previous officer, Gordon Wright. Updated officer, Brandon Cole. Verification documents, pending. He leaned forward, rubbed his face, and said, not to the camera, not to anyone specific, just out loud. Why would he transfer authority and not submit verification? He knows the protocol. Someone on the call, maybe a board member, maybe a ghost, muttered, unless he didn't. Stephen's head snapped up. Unless he didn't what? Unless he didn't submit it because he wasn't supposed to, Mason said quietly. The words hung in the digital air like smoke. Now, it wasn't about paperwork, it was about control. Because in defense contracting, clearance isn't just authorizations and certifications. It's survival. You lose the clearance, you lose the contracts, you lose the contracts, you lose everything. Stephen opened email, searched Brandon Cole plus compliance transfer. Nothing. No notes, no assignments, no documentation. He searched internal systems. Same result. Then he pulled Brandon's HR file, cross-referenced my termination date with the ITAR submission timestamp. He read it twice, then said out loud, Gordon submitted the transfer the same day he was terminated. Mason blinked. You think he did this on purpose? Stephen didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened the federal compliance portal one more time, scrolled to the submission metadata, digital signature, form updated by G. Wright, authority transferred to B. Cole per operational directive, awaiting new officer documentation per federal protocol. Stephen exhaled slowly. He followed procedure exactly. He transferred responsibility legally, properly. But Brandon never completed the authorization process. Mason's eyes widened, which means we've got 4 frozen contracts, 2 suspended partnerships, and a VP of Strategic Operations who just broke federal compliance on our most valuable assets. In the video conference silence, someone's dog barked in the background. Stephen turned off his camera and opened a new document. Subject: Critical Compliance Breach. Immediate executive review required. Because now the dominoes were falling, and Brandon was about to learn exactly how fast $75 million can vanish when federal forms are filled out correctly and ignored completely. Friday morning, 0638 hours. 3 new emails in Stephen's inbox, all flagged maximum priority. Subject lines read like air raid sirens. DOD contract suspension. Immediate response required. Pentagon export control. Compliance violation investigation. FAA certification. Authorization revoked pending review. Each message followed the same template. Different letterheads, different signatures, all carrying the same bureaucratic death sentence. Your renewal application for classified contract authorization is incomplete. Verification documents for designated officer Brandon Cole remain unreceived. Federal deadline missed. All related activities suspended pending investigation. By 0712, Stephen was on his 4th espresso, pacing his office like a caged tiger. His paralegal sat with a legal pad while Stephen dictated names, dates, and federal case numbers like a man documenting his own execution. He pulled up a spreadsheet. Active federal contracts, compliance status, 11 contracts, 6 suspended, 3 under investigation, 2 more at risk. And at the center of every rejected filing, designated compliance officer, Brandon Cole. Stephen finally called our outside federal consultant, Diana Foster, a woman who'd survived 3 Pentagon audits, 2 congressional investigations, and a divorce from a DOD inspector general. Diana didn't do small talk. Tell me why I've got 4 different federal agencies asking if Apex hired new compliance staff and forgot to mention it to the United States government. Stephen exhaled. We had a personnel transition. Our senior compliance engineer was terminated, and the new VP was assigned as designated officer on federal renewals. Long pause. Assigned by whom? Gordon Wright. Before he left. And Brandon was supposed to submit verification documents. Another pause. Longer. Jesus, Stephen. You don't just name someone as federal compliance officer and walk away. There's a process. There's federal authorization. There's verification with security clearance review. The Pentagon doesn't care about your org chart. They care about signatures, clearances, and knowing exactly who's holding liability if classified technology goes missing. I know, Stephen said. Do you understand what happens next? You've got active contracts, classified IP, shared technology between agencies. If one revokes authorization, it triggers mandatory investigation across all your federal partnerships. Your entire clearance structure could collapse. Stephen rubbed his face. It's already collapsing. The LinkedIn message arrived while I was calibrating torque wrenches and pretending civilian life didn't feel like wearing someone else's uniform. Stephen's assistant, Mr. Wright, hope you're well. Would you be available for a brief conversation this week? GC's request, just to discuss recent developments. I stared at the message, finished adjusting a socket wrench. I hadn't opened LinkedIn since posting a generic farewell that sounded more like an obituary than a career change. After 10 wonderful years, moving on to new challenges. 23 likes and 1 MLM pitch. Now here they were, just to discuss. I didn't reply. 6 hours later, email hit my personal account. Subject: urgent consulting opportunity. Apex Defense Solutions. Formal language, legal letterhead, desperation, dressed up in corporate speak. We'd like to discuss immediate consulting engagement regarding federal compliance developments. Please advise availability. Discretion appreciated. No apology. No explanation. Just panic in a business suit. I chose the diner 2 blocks from the federal building where I knew no Apex executive would ever park. Too many meters, too much real work happening nearby. I wore dress blues from my Navy days, not for nostalgia, for leverage. Stephen arrived looking like he'd slept in his office. His briefcase had coffee stains. His assistant carried a tablet and the nervous energy of someone 1 meeting away from unemployment. They sat. I didn't stand. No handshake. No pleasantries. Thanks for meeting, Stephen started, voice careful. I pulled a folded paper from my shirt pocket, slid it across the table. What's this? My rate, I said, cutting into hash browns that actually tasted like potatoes. He read it. His jaw tightened. His assistant whispered, "Is this weekly?" "Daily rate," I said. "Minimum 30-day engagement, non-negotiable. I report directly to the board, not Brandon, not operations, nobody who thinks federal compliance is optional." Stephen nodded slowly. "Also equity," I added. His eyebrows went up. "Equity?" 2-year vesting, 1.5% equity grant. I want skin in the game for cleaning up the mess I got fired in the middle of. And I want direct access to all federal filing systems. No gatekeeping, no approval chains. The assistant typed frantically. Stephen looked around like someone might be recording this. "We'll need board approval for equity." "No," I said, taking a sip of coffee that actually had flavor. "You need board approval to make the offer. There's a difference." Silence. Just the sound of working people eating breakfast and getting on with their lives. Finally, Stephen nodded. "And Brandon? Out of federal access completely. I don't care if he organizes the office fantasy football league. I don't want him within 3 security levels of classified systems. I'll handle it." "Good." I folded my hands. Not from tension, from calculation. Letting silence do what words couldn't. Stephen stared across the table. "You didn't sabotage us, did you?" I met his eyes. "No. I followed federal protocol exactly. Filed required documentation. Updated systems properly. The new VP didn't complete his part." He nodded. "3rd time in 5 minutes." Man looked like a bobblehead of corporate guilt. I stood. They stood. Meeting over. No handshakes, no warm wishes, just the quiet shift in power when competence meets desperation. They needed me. And I didn't have to raise my voice, threaten lawsuits, or make dramatic speeches. I just waited. The boardroom smelled like fear and industrial coffee. Half the executives stared at phones showing stock prices that wouldn't stop bleeding. Others shuffled papers without reading them, just hoping the rustling sounded productive. The CEO's chair sat empty, his flight from DC delayed by weather. Brandon sat near the window, tapping his pen in nervous Morse code. Stephen entered like a federal prosecutor about to present evidence. No coffee, no small talk, just a stack of folders and a manila envelope that might as well have been a death warrant. He didn't sit, didn't warm up the crowd, just slapped the first folder on the conference table with a sound that made 2 people jump. "Let's start here," he said. "ITR export control for classified guidance systems. Form submitted September 12th, 17:26 hours. He opened the file, held it up. Designated compliance officer, Brandon Cole. He let that sink in. "Here's the problem. This field used to say Gordon Wright. Gordon was our federal compliance officer for all classified contracts. DOD, Pentagon, FAA, ITAR, the entire regulatory structure. His certifications, his clearances, his verification documents, all current, all maintained, all approved for 10 years. Another folder hit the table. DOD procurement, suspended. Why? Because when the name changed to Brandon Cole, No verification followed. No federal authorization. No security clearance review. No documentation of any kind. He tossed folders like they were contaminated. Pentagon export control, under investigation. FAA certification. Revoked pending review. Brandon started to speak. Stephen cut him off with one finger. You made yourself compliance officer without authorization. Didn't submit federal documentation. Didn't respond to agency follow-ups. Didn't even know there was a process. You assumed the title and broke federal compliance for every contract Gordon maintained. A few executives exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "That's what killed the valuation." Stephen turned his envelope like evidence in a court-martial. Let me be clear, this isn't a paperwork glitch. This is federal compliance collapse. You broke the system because you didn't understand it. You thought clearance was just administrative overhead, and now 3 federal agencies are conducting investigations. Our Q4 pipeline has evaporated, and our classified IP is legally in limbo. Brandon's voice cracked. Nobody told me I needed... That's exactly the point, Stephen snapped. You were never supposed to be compliance officer. Gordon wasn't just a compliance engineer. He was federal clearance. His authority was embedded in every agency filing. His name was the signature that made this company trusted by the United States military. You fired him without understanding what you were firing. Dead silence. Brandon looked around for support, found none. One VP studied his coffee cup. Another checked his phone like it might rescue him. Stephen stayed standing. I've initiated emergency contact with all affected agencies, and I've engaged a consultant, Gordon Wright, to begin damage control. Brandon blinked. You brought him back? Stephen's jaw tightened. He didn't want to come back. He negotiated terms the board approved. Because unlike some people, I understand what happens when you cut federal compliance without permission. The CEO's face appeared on screen like a storm cloud with Wi-Fi. Still wearing his flight jacket, hair messed from the red eye, bags under his eyes that spoke of overnight damage control calls with Pentagon liaisons. Status report, he said. No greeting, no pleasantries. What's the situation with federal contracts? Stephen didn't hesitate. You want to know why our clearances are suspended? The CEO nodded once. Stephen turned slightly. Not theatrical, just clinical. Ask him why he terminated Gordon Wright. All eyes turned to Brandon. Brandon froze mid-breath, no words coming. The CEO looked at him like he was reading a casualty report. You fired Wright, the compliance engineer, the one who maintained our federal clearance structure? Brandon tried to speak. Nothing came out. Gordon Wright, the CEO said slowly, maintained every classified contract we have. Every Pentagon authorization, every export license. His voice dropped. And you fired him. Brandon opened his mouth again. The CEO didn't wait. You're done. No shouting, no desk pounding, just 2 words that don't need volume because they come with consequences already built in. Brandon stood, wobbled, then walked out with his tablet still showing an unfinished email he'd never send. The door closed behind him like the end of a very short chapter. By Monday morning, new signage appeared outside my office. Gordon Wright, Chief Compliance Officer. Not a cubicle, not a shared workspace. An office with walls, windows, and direct federal system access logged through the board's executive portal. I didn't decorate. No motivational posters, no family photos. Just my laptop, my restored federal files, and a single printout of our compliance status map, now realigned and current. Stephen stopped by briefly, nodded, didn't stay long. Nobody else dropped in. I preferred it that way. My final task that morning took 30 seconds. I logged into the admin system, opened the user access panel, searched Cole, Brandon. Status, active. I clicked the drop-down. Terminate access. Confirmation prompt. Are you sure? I clicked yes. A soft chime played. That was it. No revenge speech, no dramatic confrontation, just restored order. I leaned back in my chair, watching the cursor blink steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in months, I smiled. I didn't have to raise my voice, I just followed federal procedure. The system did the rest. And somewhere in that building, phones were ringing with good news from Pentagon procurement. Contracts restored, clearances reinstated. The United States military trusting Apex Defense Solutions again. Sometimes the best revenge is just knowing your worth. They learned that firing experience doesn't eliminate the consequences of that experience. It just removes your ability to control them. In a world of shortcuts and disruption, the person who actually knows how things work will always have the last word.